My name is Earl Willis Jr. I'm from the Morgan County Public Library. Today is April the 12th, 2017, and we're in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And today, I'm interviewing Mr. Kenney.
Right.
Mr. Kenney, where and when were you born?
I was born in Hartford, Connecticut, 1942.
1942. Do you have any siblings or any parents that were in the military?
My dad served in World War II, and I had several uncles that served in World War II, Army Air Corps. My father was in an anti-tank unit. He didn't talk much about it, and he used to joke about making private or PFC by act of Congress.
Yeah.
But he didn't talk about it much. So military wasn't a strong thing in our family after the war.
Okay. What were you doing before you entered the service?
I was a student at Western Kentucky University when it was called Western State Teachers College. You know, it wasn't, or Western Kentucky State Teachers College. It wasn't a university in those days, in 1960. In those days, it was a land-grant college. And so every able-bodied male had to be in the ROTC department for the first 2 years. And we had a sizable unit there. And then in your junior year, your professors recommended you for the next phase. I got selected for that, and I was in the Persian Rifles. And during that time frame, they started an aviation program, the Army Aviation Program, and I was selected for that. So I flew out of Bowling Green. It was run by a guy named Charlie Bridges back in 1963, I think, is when I started there.
What branch did you serve?
Well, I served in the Army because that's Western's ROTC program was an Army. But they did have, I believe, prior to that, and then maybe some of them went Air Force, but they didn't do it at Western. They went down to Vanderbilt or somebody in Tennessee.
Were you enlisted or were you drafted?
Well, in my junior year of college, the ROTC instructor, Richard Westlake, he was a captain, recommended to 4 or 5 of us that we joined the 100th Division, so we'd have prior enlisted or prior service before we went actually on active duty. Well, the strange part was it was during the Cuban crisis, right after we joined up, and everybody in the unit went to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, except for the 5 of us. So we got to stay back in Bowling Green at the university, and then on graduation, I was commissioned, a second lieutenant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember leaving to go to your duty station?
Yeah, I had a little less than a year between the time I graduated and my report date for the military, so I took a job teaching school in Davis County, and I was supposed to report like on 1 May for activation, go on active duty, and I got a deferment for like 35, 45 days, and I went in on June 6th of 1965.
Okay.
When I deployed, I went through different schools, and it was I was selected for aviation.
Okay.
So I was a helicopter pilot with the 11th Armored Cav, and we were stationed in Fort Meade, Maryland. And we flew there were 5 aircraft that flew us to, for the ship I was leaving on out of Oakland, California.
Okay.
And we couldn't tell our families or, our parents or our wives. And I'd gotten married the year that I was teaching school. My wife was a student with me at Western.
Okay.
But some reason, one of the planes that was taking the crews to part of the unit, Vietnam, out to Oakland, went the wrong way, went to Boston or someplace, and we wound up waiting about 3 days for the rest of the members showing up, and we left on the 19th of August, 1966. I can remember, and I was the mess officer and the security officer of the ship.
Okay.
And I had about 100 they weren't POWs, but they were guys that were AWOL from the 11th Cav.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they were put in the bow of the ship and saw daylight twice a day. And the other unusual thing is I had to check the meals like 4 times a day. And before we left Oakland, I couldn't eat a dry cracker. Everybody was seasick, and we're still tied to the dock.
Yeah.
And so I told the dock on ship, I said, look, I got to check the food. And I said, I can't look at a dry cracker. And he said, drop your pants. He said, I got a shot for you. And he gave me the shot, and I ate my way across the Pacific.
Yeah.
But it was a memorable moment because I managed to get off the ship and call my wife and say we're leaving within 12 hours, you know.
Okay.
So
So where did you do your basic training?
I did my basic training at Fort Meade. Let's see. I was an infantry officer,
Okay.
but I was a pilot, and I went to Benning.
Fort Benning?
Fort Benning for infantry officer basic course, and I was to be followed by airborne. I was actually in airborne training when they Tower Week, when they sent 5 of us to Fort Walters, Texas.
Okay.
I had expected to go from infantry basic to airborne to ranger school, but somehow my name came up, and we were shipped to, or drove to Fort Walters, Texas, and began what they call primary helicopter training out. It's west of Dallas, and we were flying OH-13s and 23s.
Okay.
You know, they had wooden blades. It was the old MASH helicopter.
Okay.
It had angular tail rotor boom on it.
Kind of like Korean Air.
Yeah. And the other one was looked like an ag sprayer, but they both had the glass bubbles up.
Okay. Yeah.
And then from there, after 6 months, we went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and got to fly Hueys.
Okay.
And
That's very iconic of the Vietnam.
yeah. Yeah, we used to joke about the H-23s because we had them in the unit when I went to Vietnam, my first unit, the 11th Cav. We say it took off at 60, cruised at 60, and crashed at 60 miles an hour. So,
Yeah.
but and then the rest of the time we flew Hueys. We didn't have Cobras. They weren't they came in after. You know?
Okay.
But those are the Hueys, the ABs, and C's and D's were the mainstay of the.
How did you adjust to your military life?
You know, once you've done basic, you know, I think it's harder for the families, you know, the wives, because they're not used to if they didn't grow up in the military. My wife didn't have anybody in the military. Well, she had brothers in the military, but she didn't move her. You know, I think that's the hardest adjustment is the moving around. But we adapted, you know.
Yeah.
My wife adapted. She was happy, I was happy.
Yeah. So, you know, the thing that I've noticed most of talking to the people is a lot of times the people forget about the families. There's a lot of stress and stuff on the families.
Yeah. When we went to Fort Walters and Fort Rucker, Alabama, it was just the 2 of us. We didn't have any children. And then went to Vietnam. And we'd been married 5 years when we had our first child. And she was born. I went back after my first tour in Vietnam. I was an instructor pilot out at Fort Walters, and that's when we had our first baby.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where overseas did you serve?
Well, besides Vietnam, I served. I did 2 tours in Vietnam. I did 1966, 67, and all of 70. Got there on New Year's Day and left. My boss sent me home for Christmas. And then Africa for 5.5 years.
Okay. Can you talk some about Africa? Can you explain?
Yeah, I was Army attaché in Zaire.
Okay.
In the embassy, and we also had a King Air fixed wing. I was also later on they sent me to fixed wing transition school, and I flew my second tour in fixed wing. So when I was in the attaché corps, and I was accredited with 8 countries around Zaire, and we flew everything from everywhere from Monrovia, Liberia to Cairo down to South Africa.
Okay, so from the very top to the very bottom.
Yeah, and as far west as Monrovia, Liberia.
Okay.
And then I was accredited with 8 countries around there, but you would receive missions from State Department and Department of Defense. So I had to pick up Vernon Walters, who was a general in the Army, who was then the UN ambassador, and picked him up when he and Maggie Thatcher, Prime Minister Thatcher, came back from the Falklands.
Okay.
When they had the problem down there. And we picked him up in Kenya and flew him around all southern Africa for the independence. He was talking to all the prime minister and heads of states in the southern region, sub-Saharan Africa, and for the independence of Namibia. And that was an experience. He spoke 12 languages.
Oh, really?
Very unusual guy. He was outstanding to work for.
Okay.
You know, and then you know, I was accredited with Burundi and Rwanda, which are small countries that had small military, and they had some helicopters. And I'd have to fly with their pilots, and you know, you're in the mountains that look like the Swiss Alps. It was green, and in French you'd be talking to them, and they'd say, "How many hours do you have?" And he'd say 120 or 128 hours. I go, "Oh, students get more than this," you know. And the thing was that they're flying French aircraft, so the rotor blade turns opposite of our aircraft.
Okay.
So if you happen to make an auto rotation, normally we would go in with the left pedal and hold 60 knots or whatever, how many knots. This one you go with the right pedal because the rotor blade, you want to maintain your airspeed and stuff.
Yeah.
And that was 81 to 83. I was in Zaire. 84, 85, I was in Namibia during independence.
Okay.
A general I worked for asked me if I would take a job, and I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, we lost 2 people. We had 1 military in Namibia, and he and the State Department representative were killed in northern Namibia. They were in a gas station when it was attacked, and they burned to death. So I went home and asked my wife. I said, I got ordered. They want me to go to Namibia. So not that she was going to change it, but I just wanted to let her know.
Yeah.
And so I told my boss, I said, look, you tell the South Africans why I'm there, and so I don't have to play cat and mouse with them, because I was intel at the time. And they were doing the paperwork, finishing up the paperwork on the casualties from the State Department and our military guy. And I got to, it was a civilian clothes. I dressed like them, I looked like them, drank like them.
Okay.
And we used to wear knee socks and like Bermudas.
The British knee socks?
Like the South Africans do.
Yeah.
And so it was an outstanding job. My job was photography and reporting back on what I saw.
Okay.
And I was at that time the war was going on between South Africa and Angola with UNITA and stuff like those groups. And so I would go to the northern part of Namibia and work with the South Africans and report what they were doing and stuff like that. And then 83, 86, 87 to 90, I got home just for 90, and I was in Sudan. I was a defense attaché in Sudan, and I had another King Air bird I flew, and we flew all over during the war with Chad, with Libya. I was there at Chad, in and out of places. And other than that, I was in and out of Europe, but not assigned there. I would.
Okay.
When you're on these remote assignments, you have usually no doctors and things like. Occasionally there'd be a doctor with the embassy, but if not, I'd catch the next aircraft to Europe to go for a dental appointment. And a physical or something like, or a major medical. And then I was in Hawaii for 5 years. I was with the 25th Division, and I commanded a unit in the pineapple fields. And there was another intel that I kept a unit in Oahu, one on the Big Island, the other one was in Korea. Okay. So, and then we rotate the platoons. And, that's the extent of mine.
Okay. You said that you were in Vietnam. Would you care to talk about that? Maybe you were a helicopter pilot. So
right.
Maybe explain to the people that's watching that what your average day would consist of, if there's such a thing as an average day.
Yeah, when I got to Vietnam, and it took us a little over a month to get from Oakland, California to Vung Tau, was with the port where we disembarked. And they had some sappers that had a waiting party for us, and they blew up the ship next to us, tried to put bombs on the ship, and so we didn't spend much time on the ship. The next morning we were all taken, and our aircraft were waiting for us, but we weren't, we were just the personnel on the ship. And we do, what do you call it, like target practice when you're out in the ocean. You're not going to hit anybody. You couldn't see anybody, and this was prior to, satellite radios and stuff like that. So, well, we arrived, I think it was the 20th of September in Vung Tau. We were trucked up to Ben Hoa, where we had a base camp set up and a helipad up there. And so first thing you had to do was get your tents, GP medium set up, and that's where your quarters were. The pilots, we were all together. And they infused us, because we didn't have any in-country experience, we just arrived. We were divided up, and went with the first division and other units around that as helicopter pilots or helicopters, and we rode with them for about 10 days, learning different missions and how to fly, low level, at altitude, what you did if you received fire and stuff like that. It was a great learning experience, and it didn't take long, to get shot at, or we never lost a guy in my unit, in 11th Cav. But your typical day was you get up, have breakfast, at the chow hall, and if you had a mission that day, you know where you were going and what type, whether it was a resupply mission or if you were dropping some of the 11th Cav troops in. The 11th Cav was the first unit to take tanks into Vietnam. Okay. Which was unusual for a country that was all jungle. Yeah. It was like, you go in the same place and have to turn around and come back out the same place, But what they would do is they would drop heavy ordnance into an area that would just clear out areas bigger than football fields, and then they'd send the engineers in and make paths and stuff like that. Then the tanks would go in and stuff. But then you'd fly your mission, depending on whether it was how many sorties you flew that day. It might be a 6-hour day, it might be a 1-hour mission. You never knew until that day,
So you were the transportation for everybody in different things.
Hauling troops into combat, or you would fly combat, convoy coverage. And one of the worst days I was in Vietnam, what happened in November of '66, we picked up the regimental commander in Ben Hoa. He'd had a meeting. Our mission was to pick him up and bring him back to the base camp. And you're always monitoring several radios on your aircraft. And as we were coming down through the rubber plantations, we saw one of our convoys, and then all of a sudden we saw gray puffs of smoke, so we knew that they were under attack. And we dropped down. We got a conversation with the lieutenant that was in charge. I believe it was a lieutenant, and he said they'd hit an ambush, and they were getting hit pretty hard. And so we turned around to the colonel in the back, and said, "Hey, they're under attack. We're going to go down and pull out some wounded and stuff like that." Well, we made 3 or 4 flights in, just covering them, hitting the bad guys off on the edge of where the jungle was, but there was a clearing on each side of the road. And so then after we had gone in, I think it was 3 or 4 times, they said they were needing a medevac. Well, we became a medevac aircraft, and the standard procedure was you took out the wounded and you left the KIAs there until all the wounded were out. Well, I mean, it was, and I can still to this day remember the guy was driving a truck, and they were carrying him. The RPG came in the passenger side of the truck and detonated, took both his arms and both his legs off. And so all it was a torso. And they brought him in, and they were putting people on both sides, but he sat on our radio. They had him laying on our radio. I don't know how the kid lived, but the next day we went and visited him at the hospital, took the regimental commander in, and he was still alive, but somebody said his adrenaline was just pumping away, and he didn't bleed to death. You know, I mean, it was amazing. But then there was another kid, I remember, a black NCO. They were lifting him over a barbed wire fence, and his leg was just hanging there, and it hung in the barbed wire fence. Even with the aircraft, you couldn't hear him screaming, but you could see him screaming. You know, it was one of those types. And we probably hauled out on the first load 8 or 9, living people. And some of them were burned because they were hit the gas tanks and stuff like that. And I think we made 3 trips into the nearest medevac unit. And someplace along the line, we dropped the colonel off. He was the regimental commander. And then we kept picking up. And then we went in for the bodies and stuff like that. And it was the worst day of my life because you picked up guys that were, not only were we didn't have body bags because it was a fluid operation. And so when you're out on a convoy, you don't have body bags with you. But the worst part of it was the guys that got burned to death. You don't know if they died and then were burned or what happened, but I can remember I could fly for a few minutes and I'd throw up. And then I'd say, you got it. He'd fly while I was throwing up, and then I'd fly while he was throwing up, because parts of the bodies we had no doors on the sides of the aircraft, so the air from the rotor blades making it wash back up, plus, it was terrible. And I don't know how the guys in the back, the crew, the gunner and the crew chief, I didn't have time to, because bullets are flying this way at you all the time, and never took a hit. I don't know. God was watching over me that day. To this day, I don't know how I didn't take one round in the aircraft, but it gives me even cold chills right now thinking about it.
I understand.
But other than that, that was probably one of my worst days, because I was working with U.S. troops, and the elephant grass there was terrible. You got jungle, and then you have elephant grass.
Which is, how tall was that?
Well, some places it was 8 foot tall. So you have to hover. When you you come in flights of, 5 or 6 aircraft, and then there'll be another flight in front of you, whatever, and you're dropping the troops off. Well, they jump off, they despair, because the grass was so high, And you rotor wash, even with laying the stuff down, you couldn't see the guys sometimes. So you don't know if they broke their legs when they hit the ground or what they were jumping into and stuff like that. And then the other missions I had, you would go, start in the morning, you'd haul, say, ammunition out to them or water. We had slings underneath the aircraft, and they had to weigh a certain amount, couldn't exceed it.
So you said you had a tail gunner, so that was like a guy with the M60 machine gun?
Yeah, the crew chief and the gunner both had M60 machine guns.
So you had some protection. Right?
Oh yeah, and but we had no armament.
Yeah.
This was before we wore a flak vest. And what we normally took the flak vest off, or you got an extra one, and you would throw it down in the chin bubble, because what would happen is the flak vest, they're shooting up at you. So that meant they were down at, say, a 45-degree angle, or even less than that. If it hit your flak vest, it wouldn't penetrate, but it would ricochet, come up and hit you in the head or something like that. Yeah. So we throw them down in the chin bubbles just to stop them down there before it hits us. Yeah. I mean, they were testing stuff out in those days. We had armor-plated helmets, and they didn't breathe. So you'd put it on after, and if you made it an hour, your jaws were hurting it wouldn't move. Most of the other helmets were plastic or something. They had sponge inside, and then we had looked like catcher's knee pads, and stuff like that. Well, if it hit that stuff, it always ricocheted someplace, so you didn't want to. I mean, say, oh yeah, I lived from that, but I died because it hit me in the head later,
Yeah.
in a ricochet. And then you'd fly night missions too. We always, and I think that's why I got this Agent Orange, is because we got missions to fly at night, and there'd be tanks in the back of the aircraft, and they'd issue us these special breathing apparatus. And the snorkel thing would be out the window. Well, the rotor blade rotor wash would made it go like that, so whatever we sprayed would wind up coming back in on us. But we didn't know what we were, spraying. So we just we'd turn the lights off, fly around the area, and spray this stuff. Well, after a while, you notice the trees were dead and stuff like that.
Yeah, and to the people that are not watching this, the Agent Orange was to kill the foliage, to hide people from the enemy.
It's the same. It was made up in Owensboro. Part of it. It's basically Roundup in a more stronger dosage. But at the time in 1960, whatever it was, or even in 70, you didn't know what Agent Orange was. It was later on, after guys started having major problems. But it was a defoliant.
Yeah.
And we used it, or the U.S. government did, or military used it all the time. Usually flown by the Air Force in special planes, C-130s and stuff like that. But if you had aircraft in your unit, you would spray it too.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes it was called mosquito spray.
Yeah, they would get rid of. Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing that I've asked people, and it's a thing that you can tell me you don't want to talk about now. I know you've already covered this. So for the people that's watching this, is it any way to understand when you finally comprehend it? Like somebody's trying to take your life. Is that? I mean, how does it crosses your mind? Is it?
It's a two-way street. And when you're moving 120 miles an hour, depending on where you were, we were right on the trees. So by the time they hear you, you either, they may not see you, because the canopy and the trees, they would just take a machine gun and shoot up in the air, and by luck they'd hit you. Yeah. Now if you were landing in an LZ dropping troops off, and they're already there and in bunkers and stuff like that for ambush, you go in to drop, but then you were a flying target, and you're the first thing they'll start shooting at. But hopefully the gunner and the crew chief are shooting. Plus, you've got a V flying in, and each of those aircraft are shooting. So you got a lot of firepower you're putting out. Plus, on some missions we'd have A4s dropping the ordnance in beside us, and I could see them going in ahead of us, or we used to have the B models and Charlie model. Hueys had rockets on them.
Okay.
And so you'd see them. Now, when the rockets from the helicopters, the Charlie models, they'd hit bunkers and stuff. But when the A4s came in, they were flown by the Vietnamese. I mean, you could see the shockwave concussion coming out, and you'd feel it in your helicopter as you flew through it,
Yeah.
I mean, knocked doors off the aircraft that they were on there.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful.
So, but thankfully, I didn't didn't lose a crew member, and didn't get shot up. The one time I got shot up, but I lost my track now. I don't know. Ask me another question.
Did you have any like real close friends that you hung out with, or you felt real special with?
Well, I'll tell you. After 6 months with the 11th Armored Cav, the light went on at the headquarters and said, "Hey, all 3,800 people got here on the basically within 45 days of each other, depending on when the ships arrived." So that meant within 45 days, the whole unit was going to be brand new. So it was after January of 1967. Myself and one other guy, they split. They just took half the pilots and said, "Hey, you're going. We're going to send you out to other units." They called it infusion, so they rotated, so we wouldn't have a brand new set of all pilots that were still alive flying. So I got sent down to the Human in the 4th Corps, which is in a very southern part of Vietnam, got assigned to a unit called the Soc-Trang Tigers, the 121st Aviation Company. We flew strictly for Vietnamese. We didn't have, I never carried an American unless it was an advisor.
Okay.
And that's when we really got flying heavy missions all the time. When we would fly maybe 60 aircraft at a time, you know, going into on operations and stuff. Besides the Air Force support and the gun supports, and that's there were 2 incidents down there. I was walking to the tower one day, and there was a flight coming in from someplace, and I heard this bang. And once you hear the bang, you know what it is. We had a midair, somebody's rotor blades mixed, and you could see them falling out of the sky, just like 2 magnets. And they landed in a rice paddy, right beside the airfield. So we all ran over to help them. Well, there wasn't any survivors, and they were probably only 200 feet in the air, but that's 20 stories up. You know?
Yeah.
And they're moving 60, 70 miles an hour, and by the time we got to them, their bodies were bloated up, you know, and they weren't, you know, no dismemberment and stuff like that, I remember. And then one time at the base there, we had a maintenance. We had the Soc-Trang Tigers, we had the gunships, and we had a bird dog unit that did the observation fixed wing. And then we had a company called the Warriors, and they had a support company plus their gunships. And we were the most southern U.S. outfit in Vietnam.
Okay.
So we were flying all the time because the Vietnamese would have missions, and the headquarters of our unit was up in Can Tho, and so what they had different companies along the place. But so when we used to complain because we were the last airfields in South Vietnam, and so that meant our food. Everybody got our food before it got to us. So finally, when we got a bird coming in, we'd send somebody up to make sure that all the food we were supposed to get, you know, was what we was supposed to have. Because I mean, we were so isolated. And if you flew over 120 hours a month, there was an island out off Vietnam called Con Son Island, and we had a cabin out there. You'd take grenades, your weapons, and beer, because you could live off the fish out there, you know, lobsters and stuff like that. And it was a political prison on the island, and that's basically all it was. And so, but one of the guys, the maintenance officer of the transportation unit that was there, that worked on your aircraft, in the bar one night, told the guys that he got a letter from his wife and she was concerned that he wasn't come back. And I mean, it wasn't a couple of days. He had a midair. Some Vietnamese aircraft flew into him, killed him out. Everybody on his aircraft, which were maintenance types, just, you know, it had gone through maintenance and was coming out and they were test flying it. Some Vietnamese aircraft flew into him, killed about 25, 20 people. I mean, their aircrafts were always overloaded, you know.
So you didn't make it.
But those are getting back to the day that I was leaving, and I talked to my wife when I was in '66. She tells me just before we hung up that she had just received word that a close friend of mine that was in my flight class, she had just been notified he'd been killed, which was a bad send-off, you know. So, I mean, when guys would start talking about they heard this or they got that, they were like, nobody wanted to fly with them.
Yeah.
And we had one guy, every time he took off, he got wounded, you know. And one of the missions he flew with me, we took a round through the door, and it came through the door, hit him in his right knee, went through the stick, and came out his left knee. And this was about his 3rd time he'd been wounded in Vietnam. So last time I heard, they sent him back to Fort Walters, Texas, to run the museum back at the training school, you know. But that was, you know, guys would get wounded, but
Those small arms round. That was.
well, I mean, 30 caliber, or whatever it happened to be, you know,
Okay.
when it hits you. And the first time he got hit when he's flying with me, it came through the door
Okay.
and it hit him in the right leg, So I told the crew in the back, I said, hey, he's been hit in the leg, or he's been hit someplace. And they had 2 handles on the back of your seats. They could squeeze them and drop your seat back and take your harness off and move you to check you out.
Yeah.
So one of you would still be flying. I thought I turned this thing off. Anyway, the bullet came through the door and turned sideways and was laying right on his leg, and it was burning him. And I said, oh, so I said, well, at least they tell me from the back. I said, he's okay. He's just got a bullet laying on his leg, and it's hot. But the next time he flew with me, he took it through the knees, and we lost. We didn't lose anybody from our unit. That's the crazy part. But the colonel that was the head of the whole aviation group, he got killed on a big operation, and you never know why, or you're lucky. And I mean, there's sometimes, now one place where we got shot up, it was some North Vietnamese that got into the training unit. And they were going out on an operation. So they've been trained by the Vietnamese and probably our U.S. advisors and stuff like that. And on this big operation, we were probably dropping 400 or 500 people up. Some of the guys that got off the aircraft turned around and shot us up. So when things like that happen, the gunners don't wait. They just start shooting because you don't know who the good guys are from the bad guys. No. They're all dressed the same.
Do you remember when you left Vietnam for the last time, going home back to the States? Do you remember that?
I flew out of Sac Trang. It was September of 1967, and we were probably a couple 100 miles south of Saigon.
Okay.
In Four Corps, and so if there was anybody that were leaving on the same day, they put you on the helicopter. Well, since I was a pilot, I got to fly my aircraft, my last flight, up to Saigon. Well, we got shot, and they shot our hydraulics out. So normally you could take the stick and just, move it. The aircraft would go this way or that way, Well, when the hydraulics go out, you've lost all your pressure that's keeping the real nice smooth. You sit there and your stick would barely move. So we saw Tan Son Nhut airstrike. We took, declared an emergency that we'd lost our hydraulics. We make a run and landed on their big runway, and you got titanium pads on the bottom of your skids. I mean, we look like a 4th of July firework going off. I mean, sparks flying, But that was a good send off.
Yeah.
But other than that, one other mission I got, I was probably flying it 4,000 or 5,000 feet, if not higher. And something hit us. I mean, when you get shot, the aircraft gets hit, it. Because it's like somebody taking a board to your car, the big bang.
Yeah.
We check everything, the hydraulics, I don't see any red lights coming on, and we're not making loops and stuff like that. So we knew we'd been hit, but we didn't know where, and we were still able to fly it. And then when we landed, we checked it out. We had looked like a 50 cal through the tail boom, but didn't hit the drive shaft. If you lose the drive shaft, that little spinning rotor in the back is what makes you able to fly straight. As long as you keep up the speed, you can fly straight. But once you got to slow down, then the aircraft starts doing circles. And then my second tour was in 1970. I flew fixed wing. I was intel officer, and we did intelligence mission. I was there when McCain got shot down, and that became a real priority. My aircraft was full of radios, and so one of our missions was to search the band to see if they would, to pick up the word McCain, to see if we could locate him.
And he was a Navy pilot.
He was a Navy pilot, got shot down, yeah. And another thing, when I was in my first tour, down when I was in the 4th Corps flying for the Vietnamese, we had a U.S., he was a captain at the time, might have been even a lieutenant, but he was an advisor, and he got captured, Dave Rowe, what was his name? He wrote a book after he got freed. He just walked out after 5 years. He was able to, either he he befriended one of the guards or something, but he was able to get. He wrote a book called 5 Years to Freedom, and so we always were looking for, especially down in the U-Min Forest, we had missions down there to look for encampments, because if there was any encampments down there, they weren't ours. They weren't the Vietnamese, they were North Vietnamese. Okay. And so we always were looking for some place where they might be hiding them. And a strange part, a good friend of mine who was not a pilot, when he walked into some base camp and said he was an American, because they had been dressed as Vietnamese in black pajamas and stuff like that. A good friend of mine picked him up, who's an advisor down there, but then he became an attaché, and I think he was killed in the Philippines. He was murdered in the Philippines as an attaché. And he used to come to different schools, and military schools, and give a presentation on his life as a POW. But in 1970, I flew the intel missions, and we flew all over the country. Okay. From down at 4 Corps all the way up to 1 Corps into Cambodia. We didn't go into. We didn't. Even when I was in the cab, you'd wear no markings on some of your shirts, whatever the types of missions you had, and your aircrafts didn't say U.S. Army on them and stuff. And there's no line on the ground that says you're going across the border. But
I remember right, we weren't supposed to be officially in Cambodia. Is that what it was?
Yeah. And then, like when I was down flying for the Vietnamese, we would have advisors, and the only reason you could tell they were advisors, they were bigger and whiter. Yeah. But sometimes you'd have a mission to go to a certain location and pick up an organization. It might be a 1 helicopter mission, it might be a 3 helicopter mission, or 5. But the ones I was on, usually 1 aircraft missions or 2 aircraft missions. You go to a designated location, coordinates, pick up, and there'd be all these little people in black uniforms, and you'd drop them off, and then you'd get a call later on to come in and pick them up, and they'd have a string around their neck and had ears on them, so that's how they got paid. When they got into an operation, the more they killed, the more ears they picked up, and that's what their salary was. But then when I flew the intel missions in 70, we flew everything from P-2 Neptunes, that used to be a World War II plane that the Navy had. We had JATO assists on it to get it off. We had a crew of 20 on board that bird, and 3 pilots, navigator, and there was all radios inside we worked with. Stay up for 20 hours. And I knew guys that they get off the plane, go take a shower, get back on the plane. They spent their whole year in the plane, other than when they went on R&R.
How did your wife react to you leaving in Vietnam in 1970?
She thought I volunteered. I mean, there was no volunteering. Your name came up, it was an assignment, and it was a job. And I was flying fixed wing this time. Okay. So I knew my conditions were going to be better. Didn't make it any safer, In that year, you were most vulnerable when you were in your base camp. And I was in Nha Trang at that time. So it's surrounded. It's like a bowl with mountains all around you, and the sea's up to your, behind you. And it was a ship port. But even to this day, I hear a whomp. You knew that here come the mortars. They would fire mortars at you at nighttime. I don't remember if we ever got hit during the daytime. It was usually late in the afternoon till dark. Because during the daytime you couldn't see the flash from the mortar, but at nighttime, And so one night I remember we got mortared, and it hit the billets right across from mine, and we took about maybe 20 rounds. Nobody got hit, and the next night it went through the second story room that a guy from New Mexico, because he had the big Southern state flag.
Okay.
Came through his roof, and it was the old corrugated metal type. There was no insulation or anything, just that way. The next round, the next day, went to the next room. So they never moved the tube. They would just cover it up and fire.
Camouflage.
You camouflage it, take off, drop another 20, 30 rounds and stuff like that.
Do you think they did it at night so they can like walk their rounds in?
Oh yeah, because they could see the explosions, you know.
They'd
Yeah.
walk the elevation and they would.
Yeah, and sometimes the mortar they used, if they used a small, and I don't know can't remember what caliber they used, they would handhold them. You know, so that's why you didn't get much. Didn't get much accuracy. But you know, after the attack, you want all your Jeeps outside of your hooch were hit. You know, and they took PSP, not PSP, but like the old the corrugated metal culverts, and they would dig a trench, or we dug a trench, and then we'd cover the trench with the metal, and then sandbag them, 2 or 3, 4 thickness over top of it,
Yeah.
and the ends were open. And you know, if the mountains were here, you'd put so you didn't have an opening sticking the same way. So in case a round came down and hit in the bunker,
Yeah.
it just cleaned everybody out. So you turned it sideways, so they couldn't get one in the ends, because the ends of them faced our billets that we lived.
Yeah.
And but yeah, we'd lose Jeeps, trucks, whatever, you know. And we never lost a guy in that unit, but it was fixed wing. And I don't remember a plane getting shot, because I was a flight ops officer there and missions officer later on. If there was a round in the aircraft, somebody in a plane shot it through the plane.
Yeah.
It was one of those type of things, you know.
Yeah.
But,
So where did you go after your Vietnam service? Where did you go after that?
after 1970, I went out. I switched branches because when I became a pilot, military intelligence didn't have pilots. Then we got pilots, and I became a military intelligence officer. And my specialty was electronic warfare and cryptology.
Okay.
And so I went from my first assignment after I got back was Fort Devens, Massachusetts, and I was class leader there for young officers going either to Vietnam, but it was in the cryptologic area. And then I went out to the Intel officers class out at Fort Huachuca, and from Fort Huachuca I went to the 101st.
Okay.
So I reported into 101st and I was a battalion S2, the intelligence officer, and I stayed there till 74. In 1974, I went to Hawaii.
Okay.
And I commanded a unit in Hawaii that was an intel unit. And that's where I kept a platoon in on Oahu, then the Big Island, Korea, and we rotated around. I had an MP unit with me. I had a maintenance unit. There was supposed to be an aviation section in there, 5 aircraft, but I never got them while I was there. And then the remaining people, I had 3 platoons. They were Korean, Chinese, and Russian linguists.
Okay.
So that's why we were in Korea a lot. And then from, let's see, I left there in 1979, and I came back. That's when I went to 101st. No, 70. Oh, I went to the attaché school, and they sent me to French school because I was going to sub-Saharan Africa. That's when I went to Zaire from 81 to 83, 84, 85. I was Namibia, and then they sent me to Arabic school to go to Sudan, and I spent a little over 2 years in Sudan.
Okay.
Yeah. And then after I came back from Africa, I wound up serving for General Schwarzkopf.
Okay.
And I was on General Schwarzkopf's staff in the J5 shop. And I had been in the 101st for 2 years when we had a real high divorce rate, you know, in the units. And when I was on Schwarzkopf staff in this particular, I had a lot of Air Force officers, Navy officers, and Army officers working for me. And the Air Force guys particular, you know, they'd stay in the office 20 hours a day, go home, take a shower, put on a new uniform, come back to work. And it was taking a toll on their family life. And I had, it looked to me as if it was the same thing was happening back in the 101st, you know. So I put my paperwork in to retire. And my boss said, "You can't retire." I said, "Come on, you and I both know. You either got to sign these papers and recommend or disapprove, but you got to sign the paper and send it on to the..." Yeah. He said, "What's the problem?" I said, "Hey, I've been in too many units." And I said, "The feeling's not right here." I said, "We're doing too much political stuff." And we were. And guys were writing papers for Congress that, you know, stuff we weren't supposed to be involved in. It was a Navy admiral I worked for. And so he said, "Why don't you go and talk to the admiral?" I said, "Okay." I said, "Tell him I'd like to speak to him." And I said, you know, officer to officer, not, or man to man. I said, "I don't want to be, you know, I'll salute him when I go in, you know." Yeah. I said, "I just need to tell him what the problem was." I said, "He comes in at 8 o'clock in the morning, he leaves at 4:30. He was a great-great-grandson of Ulysses S. Grant."
Oh, really?
Yeah. He might have been a fine Navy officer, but when he got his feet on shore, you know, he didn't talk the same language I did, or, you know, and he had some family problems. He had a daughter that had, I believe, I don't know, spina bifida or something like that. So it wasn't a good life, you know. Well, so I went in and said, "Sir," I said, "you know, I've been around the flagpole a lot, you know." I said, "The morale here is really terrible." And I said, "It's taking a toll on these guys." I said, "You don't see it because you don't come in till 8 and you leave at 4:30. Yeah. So it straightened up for about 6 months, and then I said, "We're going back to the same." Anyway. So I walked back into my boss and, "Here's my paperwork. Yeah. You can sign her." And so they approved it, and I retired in June of 1990. July 30th of 1990, June 30th, 1990. And General Schwarzkopf didn't know that I had been in Africa. And I was in the Africa branch, right, to handle stuff for Africa, but that I spoke Arabic. Well, I retired, and it wasn't 30 days when the Iraqi thing happened.
Yeah.
And
you probably would have went back to Kuwait.
Well, I carried, once you're a regular Army officer, we used to joke, say they're hip pocket voters. So they want you back, they're going to get you back. Well, then I got a call, and I said, "Okay." I said, "I'll volunteer," but I said, "You tell me the date you want me to report and give me when's my release date." "Well, we can't tell you when the release date will be." And I said, "Well, I can't tell you the begin date either." So and then after that, I had heart surgery, so that kind of wiped me off the map. But
so what did you do in civilian life after 1990? Did you?
When I retired at CENTCOM. That's Central Command was where General Schwarzkopf was at. I took a job teaching school. I went back to teaching school. Okay. My wife was teaching in the Hillsborough County schools. They had like 42 high schools and she was in a middle school as a counselor. And I was teaching at a private school in Tampa. And my wife got a call one day from Western saying they were starting a military veterans program.
Okay. And
it was a grant program, so they flew her up. She interviewed. Next thing I know, I get a call saying, "Hey, I got the job."
Yeah.
I said, "All right." So she came back, got her clothes, and sometime during that time frame, I'd bought some land out here on Veterans Memorial and built some apartments. Okay. So she lived in one of the apartments, and then I told her I'd finish school where I was at, and I'd join her up there. So she got there in November of '92. I came in June of '93,
Okay.
And then I got a job in a grant program working with high school students. I was on the Hill for 13 years. And during that time frame, I got involved with American Legion, and
Okay.
I've been a van driver since I think we started the program. You know, one of the first, within a year or so,
Yeah.
they started. So, you know, I drive a van to the VA hospital, and I'm in the Military Officers Association, and I stay active, and I make toys, wooden toys, that,
Yeah.
and I sell at the farmers market. And
Okay.
but we enjoyed being back since we graduated. My wife's from Owensboro. Me being a Connecticut Yankee, you know,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it was quite different. So, but we call this home, because during our career in the military, we moved, if we weren't overseas, every 2 to 2.5 years. And the kids of military are called brats.
Military brats.
Yeah, military brats, because they really don't have any roots anyplace, you know. But when I was in Zaire, we had an international school that was basically run by the embassy. So my wife was already a certified teacher, and she taught at the school. And my son and daughter both went there. And then when we went to Sudan, I went to Namibia by myself
Okay.
because of the war situation. And then when we went to Sudan, they didn't have a high school. So my son went to boarding school in London, out at High Wycombe. The military has schools around the world, and there were 2 for where I was at. Could have been Torrejon, Spain, or England. So I chose England for them. They went, you know, because I had to escort some kids to Torrejon. They were problem kids, you know, from the embassies and stuff. So I said, I'm taking the lesser of the 2 evils. And he enjoyed it. He's an art teacher up in Davis County,
Okay.
and he was into art when he's in high school. So he got to go to France and Belgium, and you know, and he'd take a 14-hour flight down to Sudan to see us. And my daughter would fly from, you know, Nashville to New York to Europe to
Yeah.
wherever we were in Sudan.
So, in closing, I always ask everybody if there's anything on your mind you want to talk about, or if anybody that's watching this, if they can take one thing from this interview, what would it be?
Well, I had no thoughts that I'd ever be make the military my career. My father joked about making PFC by act of Congress. Nobody in the family had ever been a career officer, but you know, it was just something that I enjoyed. You know, I would do it over again. I might have stayed in Africa longer, because they offered me another attaché assignment, and my wife said, "You remember the movie Out of Africa?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "We're going to be out of Africa." You know? But I mean, there were rough times, and Vietnam wasn't good, and then IBTDY, some places, you know, I'd go to Egypt or Korea, Taiwan, but a lot of people, you know, think that the military is not a good life. You have to either like it or you don't like it. And those that don't like it don't make it a career, because you make it rough for everybody, you know.
Yeah.
It instills discipline in you, and I always thought if you're got a meeting at 11 o'clock, if you're there at 11 o'clock, you're late.
Yeah, and you know, I've said this to every interview. Everyone I've interviewed so far has been early.
Yeah.
And I talked to a gunnery sergeant yesterday, and he said if he's not 15 minutes early, he's late.
Yeah, but
So, yeah.
I enjoyed it. I mean, it's not for everybody, you know. And sometimes my wife and I will say, "Hey, what if we'd stayed teaching in Davis County?" You know, and she in the city system, you know, the things that we wouldn't have seen. You know, take the kids to Switzerland or Austria or South Africa and stuff like that. But, But I mean, I commanded units where you had to be, you know, the bad guy, you know, discipline people, you know.
Yeah, sometimes.
And I mean really discipline, send them to prisons and kick them out of the military. But I enjoyed it, and I'd do it again. I mean, Vietnam wasn't good, but I sometimes I watch the news, and where we lose aircraft and stuff. And I said, I wonder what the tactics are like. You know, when you're flying over deserts, different from flying over jungles.
Jungles,
you know?
yeah.
So I don't know if we've ever learned from, you know, when you can look 100 miles in every direction, I'd see a tree, but there's a lot of rocks around. You know, how do you fly in that situation? You know, so and my son didn't make it. He didn't want to go in the military. he said, I spent as much time in the military as you did. You know, my daughter said the same thing. So.
Okay.
But we're home now, back in Bowling Green,
Okay.
so we enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we both stay active in the community.
Yeah.
And she worked with the military, you know, those that served, and helping to go to get a degree and
Okay.
finance and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
we haven't given up the military.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? Or?
No, I just thank you for the opportunity.
Well, I want to thank you for your time, and especially for your service, and I just really respect the things you've done, and I just want to thank you for being part of this and your service.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And I think that's one of the things when you're in the military. Like when you go to the VA hospital, you see somebody wearing a hat, you always thank you for your service, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's gotten a good call. People appreciate, you know.
Yeah, we need to.
Yeah. I salute the flag and I stand for the flag.
Yeah,
you know?
I agree with
You
that.
know, I'm not going to say, you know, I'll say my two bits when somebody doesn't stand for the flag or whatever, you know.
Yeah, well, you can definitely do that because you deserve the right to do that.
And we're getting a helicopter here in Bowling Green.
Yeah.
It's going to be a Huey, so
yeah.
I'm going to volunteer some time on sand and then do whatever they need. See, I flew with Ray Nutter that they're, I don't know if they're going to name it after him or whatever, but he and I were both down in SOC training together. When he saw Western Kentucky University graduate, I said, when I heard this, Kenney? Who is this guy, you know?
Yeah.
He was the XO of the unit.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because I've talked to Dan Cherry and Arnie Franklin both, and they're talking about getting the Huey. That's
it's coming out of Davis-Monthan in Arizona,
Yeah.
Tucson. I said, well, how come it took me so long? They got thousands of them out there. I guess getting them released and stuff, you know. So, but I'm going to help them out, getting it sanded down and getting
sounds
it
good.
looking good out there and put it in the aviation park. So.
I just appreciate your interview, and I appreciate your time.
All right, I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yep.